clerk in Kaifeng, early to mid-11th century, slides open a wooden cash chest and finds it half full when it should be heavy. At the Ministry of Revenue, paydays for frontier troops and diplomacy are already inked on the calendar, and those dates do not move. The problem is not a single disaster. Money is showing up in more places faster than old routines can count it, collect it, and send it where it has to go. 3 dilemmas sit on the table at once. How can a rich-looking empire still miss payments on the worst days? How do you turn daily life into reliable cash without breaking the networks that produce it? And if coin can't move fast enough, what happens when paper has to carry trust instead? Stay with 4 levers, cash taxes, the salt offices, the weight of coin on the road, and the frontier bills that never wait. Markets spread through city streets and market towns, and more everyday deals get priced in cash. Fees, wages, inputs, and debts that might once have been settled in kind are now settled with strings of coins. That sounds like good news until you remember who has to make the biggest payments. Armies and border diplomacy do not accept businesses booming as a substitute for money on the day it is due. In Kaifeng, couriers arrive with bundles of reports and sealed bags of coin. Ministry of Revenue accountants and paymasters check tallies, test strings, and sort what can be spent now versus what is tied up somewhere else. The hard limit is timing, because scheduled defence and diplomacy outflows must be met even when intake arrives unevenly. A tax that arrives late is not just smaller. It can mean a missed payroll, a delayed shipment, and a commander on the frontier hearing that the capital's promises are slipping. To keep cash coming in, the state leans on revenue streams that can be counted and repeated. Monetized taxes help, but the everyday workhorse is the salt monopoly, administered through offices tied to the Salt and Iron Bureau. Walk into a salt office and the tools are not spears or banners. They are licenses, transport permits, inspection stamps, and ledgers, with clerks matching paper to cargo as merchants move salt along approved routes. The appeal is obvious. Salt is steady, people need it, and the state can turn that demand into money it can spend without personally hauling every sack. But once the state builds routines around cash, it starts to need cash the way an army needs grain. When spending rises, the quickest fix is often to squeeze more payable value out of the same society, and that pressure lands on merchants, households, and local officials who have their own ways of doing business. The bills are not abstract. In the Shaanxi frontier prefectures and along other exposed borders, garrisons need supplies, fortifications need upkeep, and envoys and agreements with the Liao dynasty and Western Xia still cost money even when fighting is limited. So prosperity does not relax the system. It speeds it up, and it raises the penalty for a mistransfer. Then a plain physical problem becomes the hinge of the story. If both the market and the state run on money, they have to move money, and coin is heavy. A large payment is not a number in a book. It is carts, guards, travel time, and the risk that a shipment never arrives, or arrives shaved, clipped, or short. Now shift west to Sichuan, early 11th century, in and around Chengdu. Merchant networks and local officials face coin scarcity and remittance risk at the same time, and big settlements can choke on the sheer weight of metal. Picture a warehouse yard outside Chengdu. Porters tie coin strings into bundles, a merchant counts them again, and hired guards scan the road because the value is loud and visible. The limit is simple because every extra cart and every extra day raises the chance the payment fails. So people reach for something lighter. Paper slips tied to deposits, and reputations start to stand in for coin because they can move value without moving metal. One early answer in Sichuan was jiaozi. It works when enough people accept the rules, often with local officials helping standardise terms and enforce acceptance beyond a tight circle. That is the first wow moment. A stamped note can cross Sichuan faster than a cart of coin, and it can settle a large account with far less risk. If this is your kind of history, subscribe. Where are you listening from? And did you expect paper money to show up in 11th century Sichuan? Once paper starts working for merchants, the state notices. In Kaifeng, the Ministry of Revenue does not care about novelty. It cares about meeting scheduled outflows, and paper looks like a way to pay without waiting for the right coin to arrive from the right place. This is where the pressure turns into a decision under time. Ministry paymasters can either refuse paper and miss a deadline, or accept it and push the risk forward into redemption and oversight. Paper brings a new kind of fragility. Someone has to guarantee redemption, police fraud, and decide what happens when notes outrun available coin. Back in Kaifeng, a paymaster can make a deadline by accepting paper claims instead of demanding immediate metal. The procedure is clean, a note is checked, stamped, entered into the ledger, and passed along as payment. The risk is that the whole chain now depends on everyone believing the note will still be honoured later. Salt revenue and monetized taxes can be counted into the treasury. Confidence cannot, and when confidence wobbles, repayment turns into a fight over who eats the loss. One caution here. We know many of these pressures through official records like memorials to the throne and later compilations, and they tend to spotlight crises more than quiet months. Still, the pattern is hard to miss. Commercialization expands cash exchange faster than old routines can track, and the state's hunger for spendable revenue grows with it. Soon, the new policies under Wanganshi will enter the story. Paper and tighter fiscal routines spread because frontier and diplomacy bills have to be paid on time even when coin and taxes arrive unevenly. The cost is that trust and policy choices start to decide what money is, turning repayment into a political battlefield. The next threat is a court fight over how far the state should go, with the frontier clock still ticking. Once Kaifeng starts treating paper and ledgers as emergency tools, the next question becomes brutal. Who gets blamed when the numbers don't line up? The fight over reform does not start in a speech. It starts when a deadline hits and the money is not where it needs to be. In a Shaanxi frontier prefecture in the 1070s, inside the finance office behind the Yamian Gate, the air smells of ink and grain dust. The prefectural treasurer has account books open on the table, granary tallies stacked beside them, and courier slips waiting to be sealed for the next relay. The hard limit is simple: turn local receipts into timely frontier provisioning, while wartime readiness pressure never lets up. A clerk runs a finger down a register line by line, then walks it across the room to a granary manager who is counting sacks and checking seals. If the numbers do not match, the shipment pauses, and the pause ripples outward, because carts, porters and escorts are already scheduled. This is the world the new policies, the Xinfa, land in. In Kaifeng in the 1070s, Emperor Shenzong backs Wanganshi, but the centre cannot live on intent alone. Policy survival depends on measurable compliance reports and defensible accounting, because the censorate and senior ministers are watching for failures they can prove on paper. A reform begins as a memorial to the throne, then it turns into an order that has to survive copying, transport and recopying. By the time it reaches a county desk, it is no longer a slogan. It is a new column in a ledger, a new due date, and a new way to label the same old obligation. In Kaifeng, the court's work shows up as objects. Bundles of memorials to the throne are tied with cord, docketed, copied and sorted into piles that answer one question: did the officers comply, and can they show their math? A senior minister can point to a clean table of figures and say the policy is working. A censor can point to a mismatch, a missing receipt, or a late remittance and say the same policy is turning into abuse or illegality. Either way, the argument moves forward because someone can attach a number to it. That pressure travels fast. At this point, the centre is getting cleaner numbers, but the chase for clean numbers is starting to distort behaviour. Back in the Shaanxi prefecture, a courier arrives at the gate, hands over a packet, and the treasurer breaks the seal in front of witnesses because the chain of custody matters. Inside are instructions that change how collections are recorded and when transfers are due. Clerks scrape old entries clean, rewrite headings, and start a fresh register, because the new categories have to match what Kaifeng expects to see. Now the treasurer has a decision that is not philosophical. Follow the letter exactly and risk breaking a local routine that kept grain moving, or adapt it and risk being accused of ignoring the order when the audit comes. Quotas and reporting make the centre's cash flow feel more predictable, but only if the paperwork is tight. That means forms, registers, deadlines and reconciliations that force every office to show the same story in the same format. Some of the new measures push official credit into the countryside to smooth cash shortages, but once repayment is written into registers, it can start to feel like another tax. A month's work can turn on a single reconciliation. A clerk totals coin strings collected, another totals what was issued for transport and provisioning, and the treasurer has to make the remainder match the register, because a remainder that cannot be explained becomes a problem that travels upward. The fear is not only shortage, it is what a late payment looks like when it lands in Kaifeng as a line item. If a frontier unit is paid late, the centre can read it as incompetence or worse. If collections are pushed too hard and complaints follow, the centre can read that as misrule. If the books look too perfect, the centre can suspect the numbers were massaged to survive inspection. This is where memorial politics becomes a steering wheel. Competing reports and accusations do not just describe what happened. They reshape what local officials choose to do next, because success is whatever can be defended in the next packet of documents. In Kaifeng, that packet is built deliberately. Offices assemble summaries, attach supporting tallies, and send them through channels where the censorate can pull a thread and unravel the whole bundle. So local offices learn the new game. They do not just move grain and coin, they move proof. Now moved to a lower Yangtze County Yamen in the 1070s. The magistrate sits with clerks and village elders under a wall map and a quota table, because the remittance date is close and cash is arriving in lumps, not a steady stream. A broker waits outside the gate offering to advance coin for a fee, while the elders warn that repayment dates don't bend if the market turns. The magistrate weighs it with one eye on the register, because the register is what Kaifeng will read. He approves the least ugly option, and the county meets its line item, but the resentment stays local and invisible until it shows up later as evasion. Monitoring tightens, and so does evasion. Households find ways to delay or reroute payments, brokers offer to handle obligations for a fee, and local notables use their connections to shift burdens into corners the registers do not easily capture. The state answers in the language it trusts most. More paperwork, more inspections, more cross-checks between what the register says and what the granary, the transport contractor, or the tax desk can actually show. In a Shaanxi depot yard, a granary manager breaks a seal, checks the mark, and refuses a sack that does not match the tally. The sack goes back on the cart, the driver argues with the clerk, and the clerk points to the register because the register is what will be read later. None of this relaxes because the frontier clock does not relax. Defence pressure keeps the centre treating slippage as a strategic risk, not just a budget headache, so late remittances and messy books trigger tighter demands instead of patience. The result is that reform turns into a chain of quotas, deadlines and audits that pushes local offices to produce legible, on-time transfers, because Kaifeng can only protect the policy with numbers. The cost is that officials start spending as much effort making the paperwork defensible as making the underlying deliveries smooth. And the new threat is that as the court learns to punish and reward by reports, every local workaround becomes a fresh weapon in factional scrutiny. In Kaifeng, once audits and accusations become weapons, the real test is whether the empire can still turn receipts into payments at the border. Late 11th century, at a Liu border exchange yard, the road ends in carts, scales and bundles of coin string laid out on a table. Song envoys hold sealed packets and tallies, Liao officials stand with their clerks, and transport contractors watch the sun because every delay costs them. The hard part is not adding up value inside the Northern Song. It is turning that taxable value into something the Liao side will accept across a political boundary fast enough to match a schedule that does not care about bad roads or local shortages. A song clerk breaks a seal, tests a string for weight, and reties it tighter before writing a fresh line in the register. A contractor gestures to a wagon of goods meant to cover a shortfall, but the Liao side wants payment that can be checked quickly, not a substitute that will turn into an argument later. By late afternoon, the envoys face a decision with the clock running. If they insist on perfect terms, the transfer misses the window, and the next round of diplomacy and provisioning starts late. If they accept a less convenient form of payment, the calendar holds, but the clean-up shifts to redemption and accounting back home. What made this era feel like it was working is simple in practice. More daily life moved into prices and cash. The state pulled more of that cash into its hands through taxes and monopolies, and paper claims like jiaozi, later drawn into government-managed notes and vouchers, helped value travel when metal could not move fast enough. The payoff was reach. In many places, the state and the market could settle bigger obligations across longer distances and tighter deadlines, using paper, vouchers, and ledger entries instead of only heavy coin on the road. But the border yard shows the bill that comes with it. Once value is turned into paper and procedure, someone must decide what counts as payment, and someone must take the loss when the chain fails. Now shift to a major market town on the Grand Canal corridor near the Huai River, late 11th to early 12th century, where the salt monopoly office shares a wall with the tax desk. License boards hang on the wall, inspection stamps sit by the inkstone, and ledgers are thick with the names of licensed merchants. Outside, boats sit low in the water with salt cargo under mats while boatmen and wholesalers wait, and tax collectors pace the wharf with their tally slips. Inside, monopoly administrators check permits, inspectors look for missing seals, and merchants stand still, because one rejected load can throw an entire route off schedule. The pressure is blunt. Meet the salt revenue targets Kaifeng expects, without breaking the distribution networks that actually move salt to market and bring money back. An inspector lifts a mat, taps a sack, and compares the mark to the permit. A merchant lays down receipts and a transport pass, and the administrator has to decide whether the paperwork is good enough to let the boat go or bad enough to seize the shipment. Seize too much and merchants pull back, boats stop running, and the monopoly's money dries up in the very corridor meant to feed the treasury. Go too easy, and the numbers look fine for a month. Then the shortfall shows up later as a missing remittance that cannot be explained. This is how the system stretched and tightened at the same time. More commerce meant more transactions that could be taxed, and the salt monopoly could turn a basic necessity into spendable cash, but only if officials kept merchants inside the channel instead of driving them out. Credit tools could smooth the channel in some circuits. A licensed merchant might settle with paper claims and scheduled redemption, and an office might record revenue sooner even if coin arrived later, which helped the Ministry of Revenue cover fixed outflows. That is the part that looks like a win in Kaifeng. Defence and diplomacy payments could be met more often, because future receipts could be pulled forward into spending that had to happen now. But when cash taxes, monopoly enforcement and credit all tighten at once, the wobble does not vanish. It moves, and the question becomes who gets stuck holding it when a route breaks or a payment comes due. When the centre demands more cash on time, local officials lean harder on households and merchants. Merchants respond by raising fees, rationing credit, or refusing routes that look like seizure traps. When salt enforcement gets sharper, merchants carry more risk and more compliance cost, and they pass it on through higher prices and stricter terms. When paper claims spread to keep trade moving, households and small traders can get squeezed by repayment dates that do not bend when a harvest disappoints or a market stalls. The state is not outside this pressure. The more it relies on booked revenue, paper claims and scheduled remittances, the more a missed redemption turns into a treasury problem instead of a local inconvenience. After the new policies, the Sin Fei harden incentives, bargaining shifts in the late 11th century. A county and a prefecture do not just argue about what is fair, they argue about what can be proven in registers and delivered by the due date. Local officials gain leverage when they control bottlenecks the centre cannot see from Kaifeng. They can hit targets by leaning on particular merchant groups, by timing collections, or by classifying payments to satisfy the forms, and those choices decide who feels the squeeze. Market intermediaries gain leverage too because they sit between policy and delivery. Licensed merchants, transport contractors, and brokers can make a quota achievable or make it expensive, and officials who need clean numbers often end up bargaining in practice, even when the law reads like a command. You can see it back in the Hui office when an administrator chooses the least damaging option. Approve a shipment with imperfect paperwork and keep the route alive, or enforce the rule to the letter and watch the network freeze, then explain the revenue drop to superiors who only see the ledger line. This is the ceiling of the pressure cooker. Strategic threat on the borders keeps the calendar unforgiving, and fiscal tools like cash taxes, the salt monopoly, and managed credit let the Northern Song meet that calendar for a long time. But the same tools make the joints easier to crack. The system gets good at paying on schedule, and it gets fragile when trust, distribution or compliance slips, because there is less slack and more of daily life is tied to fixed dates and official channels. If you've ever watched a supply chain stall because one payment or one document didn't clear, you already understand the danger. So the revolution was real because it turned commerce into spendable state power, and it made value mobile through paper and procedure. The cost was a price you could not dodge, because volatility was pushed into merchants' routes, household repayment, and the states promised to redeem and enforce. And the next threat is that when a new shock hits, the test is whether boats, carts, stamps, and redemption days still line up before the channels jam.